In addition to all the attributes that we have seen so far, there are other attributes also with different functionality. For example, disabling any input and adding other form validations, etc. There comes a disable boolean attribute that turns off any form control. For example, here we have a login form inside our HTML document, and if you look at our page, that looks something like this. Now say if we want to disable any of these inputs, either username or password, we can apply a disable attribute. Say for the username, let's apply disabled. Now save it, then let's give it a refresh. When we apply disabled attribute inside our input element, the users won't be able to interact with that particular input elements, but that element will be displayed on the page. As we can see here, there is a disabled attribute inside this element for the username. Therefore, we cannot interact with this input element, but we can see that particular element. And the disable input element does not send any kind of information to the server for the form processing when we submit the form. After the disabled attribute, we have another attribute, that is placeholder attribute. The placeholder attribute provides additional information on how the form input should be filled. It just works as a hint within input or text area field for the users. So for example, here we have input field. So first of all, let's get rid of this disabled attribute so that we can interact. Here we have. Now there is a placeholder attribute. So the placeholder attribute works as a hint. So right now here we have username. So to provide a hint for the users, we can provide a placeholder attribute, and inside the placeholder attribute, say we have to define username. So we can provide some hint for the username. You can say John 99. Now save it, let's give it a refresh. Here we are. So this is the kind of hint. So here we can see, let's zoom our page bit. Alright, here as we can see, this is the username input field, and we have provided one placeholder attribute with the John_99. So that's the hint. So the user gets a hint that they have to type their username, say maybe John_I09. This kind of username can come, and similarly we can also provide hint for the password. Let's say placeholder, we can say password, save it, and give it a refresh. Here we have password. So this is how and why we define placeholder attribute to provide hint for the users. So now if we focus our input element and we start writing our username or password, we can find that the placeholder will be gone. So let's write something John. As you can see, that placeholder is gone. Similarly for the password, say something, so the placeholder is gone. So this is how the placeholder attribute works inside a form. At the end, we have one more additional attribute, that is required attribute. If a form element contains required boolean attribute, that means that field must not be left blank. The field must contain a value before submitting the form to the server. Say for example, here we have a form and that we have already seen, and that forms look something like this. Now let's provide some data here, say John for the username, and without filling this password field, let's click send here. So without filling this password also, we have submitted our data here inside this form. But let's have a required attribute for our password now. Now save it, then give it a refresh. Now let's apply our username here. Now without this filling password, let's click send here. As we can see here that the form is throwing some error. It's just because we have applied a required attribute. So without filling this password, we cannot submit our data inside this form. So whenever we need to make any input field as compulsory and the user must have to fill that particular input field, therefore we can apply a required attribute to our input elements. Save it, then give it a refresh. Now we cannot fill the data or submit the data without filling any data for the required elements.